All right, buckle up, everybody, because we are diving into some seriously fascinating history today. You handed us this stack of documents about English privateering, and wow.
It's a story that goes way deeper than just pirates and plunder.
Yeah, it really is. We're going to be talking about power, ambition, and how a nation that, let's face it, wasn't top dog on the world stage
Not all.
managed to challenge empires like Spain.
It's pretty wild. And it all starts with England in the late 16th century. They're trying to find their place in the world
Right.
while facing off against these powerhouses like Spain and France.
Right, exactly.
But their strategy, well, it wasn't exactly conventional,
So let's break this down. We're talking about privateering,
Right.
which was essentially state-sanctioned piracy.
Basically. Yeah.
But how did that even work? Like, how did that whole system function?
Well, Queen Elizabeth I,
Look, go
a
ahead.
ruler known for her clever tactics, that's for sure,
Definitely.
saw an opportunity. Instead of, draining all her resources to build a massive navy, she issued these licenses called letters of marque.
Letters of marque.
And these letters basically gave individuals the right to attack and capture enemy ships, primarily Spanish vessels,
Oh, interesting.
and then keep a portion of the spoils.
So these weren't just random pirates sailing around doing whatever they wanted.
No, no, no.
They were operating within a legal framework, at least according to England.
Right. According to England, this was all totally legal and above board.
Right. But that brings up a question. Was this ethical? I mean, to other nations, it probably just looked like plain old piracy, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's where things get really interesting. Because, you see, these letters of marque, they had specific terms and conditions.
Okay.
They outlined where privateers could operate, what ships they could target, and how captured goods were supposed to be handled.
Uh-huh.
But, in the heat of battle, those lines could get a little blurry.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And for nations like Spain, who were on the receiving end of these attacks,
Woof.
it definitely felt like a violation.
A violation of international norms, for sure.
Right.
Okay, so we've got this legal gray area, nations viewing these actions very differently. But let's talk about the individuals involved.
Okay.
The documents mention some pretty famous names, like Sir Francis Drake.
Oh, yeah.
He was a privateer, right?
Yes. Drake was one of the most successful and notorious English privateers.
He's often portrayed as this daring adventurer.
Yeah.
But the reality, I'm guessing, is much more complex.
Much more complex.
Yeah. From what I've seen, he was known for being pretty ruthless.
Absolutely. The sources describe incidents where Drake actually beheaded members of his own crew for insubordination.
Wow.
There are even accounts of him leaving pregnant slave girls stranded on remote islands after, well, they'd served their purpose in his eyes.
That's terrible.
His actions were often brutal and driven by a desire for personal gain and glory.
That's pretty dark. It's hard to reconcile those actions with the image of him as like a national hero.
I know, right? That contradiction is really at the heart of Drake's story. While he was committing acts that we would, completely condemn today, he was celebrated in England.
For his audacity, I imagine.
For his audacity and, the wealth that he brought back. Actually, one of his raids on a Spanish treasure fleet, just one raid,
Wow.
yielded so much loot that it single-handedly paid off England's entire national debt.
Wait, seriously? The spoils from one raid
One raid
wiped out their national debt?
wiped it out completely.
That's insane. Imagine the impact that had on England's finances.
Oh, huge.
And Elizabeth's ability to fund other projects, like, I don't know, building up her navy.
Right.
It makes you think about the economic motivations behind privateering. It wasn't just patriotism.
Exactly. Privateering wasn't just about weakening rivals. It was a lucrative business venture that enriched the crown, private investors, and, of course, the privateers themselves. This influx of wealth played a significant role in England's growing economic power.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've got this, complex figure in Drake
Right.
operating in a system that's fueled by profit and national ambition.
Yeah.
But there's another key player in the story, right? Sir Walter Raleigh.
Yes. Raleigh represents a different side of English privateering.
Okay.
While he was also knighted by the Queen, just like Drake,
Okay.
he wasn't a swashbuckling sea captain,
Right.
Raleigh was more of a courtier, a scholar, and an entrepreneur.
Okay, so how did he fit into this whole privateering world?
While Raleigh was a master networker, he used his connections to secure funding for expeditions and even attempted to establish colonies in North America.
Interesting.
Seeing them as potential bases for further raids on Spanish shipping
Oh, sneaky.
and expansion of English power, His vision was more long-term,
more strategic,
focused on establishing a lasting English presence in the New World.
So while Drake was out there, seizing treasure ships,
Yeah.
Raleigh was thinking about the bigger picture: colonization, trade routes,
The whole thing.
building a foundation for English power. That's fascinating. It seems like their contrasting personalities and approaches highlight how multifaceted English privateering truly was.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the impact of these actions, well, it went far beyond just gold and glory.
Right.
These rays, along with other tensions, were pushing England and Spain closer to war, a war that would erupt with the arrival of the Spanish Armada. The Spanish Armada. It's one of those events in history
I know, right?
that really captures the imagination. In 1588,
Yeah.
fueled by years of frustration over, you guessed it,
English privateering.
English privateering, King Philip II of Spain
Right.
decided to make a bold move.
He wasn't messing around, was
Yeah.
he? So what exactly was his plan? What was he trying to do?
Philip assembled a massive fleet, over 130 ships,
Wow.
with the goal of invading England
Uh-huh.
and taking down Queen Elizabeth. It was a huge gamble,
Yeah.
a monumental effort
To just crush.
to crush English power
Yeah, wow.
and assert Spanish dominance.
Once and for all. So, did his plan work? Did the Armada succeed?
Not even close.
Really?
The English, despite facing a much larger force,
Yeah.
they were ready. They had a secret weapon of sorts.
What was that?
Their experience gained from, you guessed it,
Privateering.
privateering. Their ships were smaller
Oh, wow.
and faster,
Uh,
perfect for the type of hit-and-run tactics they'd honed for years while raiding Spanish ships.
so those skills they learned while plundering treasure actually came in handy when defending their own shores. That's incredible. Did they have anyone leading the charge who we might recognize? Anyone familiar?
Leading the English fleet, some very familiar names, seasoned privateers like Sir Francis Drake.
Oh, wow.
They knew how the Spanish fought, they
Wow.
knew their weaknesses, and they used that knowledge to devastating effect.
So it wasn't just a matter of brute force. They had strategy and outmaneuvering the enemy. Didn't the weather play a role, too?
The weather.
Yeah, I've heard stories about storms wreaking havoc on the Spanish fleet.
You're absolutely right. Fierce storms in the English Channel scattered the Spanish ships,
Oh, wow.
making it even harder for them to coordinate their attack.
Making it impossible.
It was a perfect storm,
Literally.
for the English. Their naval skill, combined with those brutal weather conditions, turned the tide of the battle.
The mighty Spanish Armada, meant to conquer England, was defeated. It
Defeated!
must have been a turning point in history. What were the lasting effects of this clash?
The impact was huge. The defeat of the Armada shattered the perception of Spanish invincibility. It announced to the world that England was a force to be reckoned with, a rising naval power
Yeah.
that could hold its own against the biggest empires.
Because up to this point, they really hadn't, right? They were
Yeah.
kind of the underdog.
And remember, much of England's success can be traced back to those privateers,
Yeah.
the wealth they brought in, the expertise they developed.
It's fascinating how an activity that was initially seen as, somewhat lawless,
Yeah.
actually laid the groundwork for England's naval dominance. But we have to acknowledge the dark side of this story.
For sure.
The documents you provided are full of accounts of the violence and cruelty inflicted by these privateers.
It wasn't all sunshine and roses, that's for sure. We can't romanticize this period. The pursuit of profit and power often came at a terrible human cost. We've talked about Drake's ruthlessness.
Yeah.
But even someone like Raleigh, who, was seen as more of a gentleman
A scholar.
and a scholar, was involved in some brutal episodes.
The documents mention his role in colonizing Ireland, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't that a particularly violent chapter?
Yes, Raleigh was deeply involved in the colonization of Ireland, and his methods were often harsh.
Okay.
He used military force to suppress rebellions, leading to widespread suffering and displacement.
That's awful.
And, we can't forget about his efforts to establish colonies in North America. While those expeditions were driven by, a desire for exploration and settlement, they were also motivated by the potential for privateering profits and the exploitation of resources.
Of course. It's a reminder that the line between exploration, colonization, and outright piracy was incredibly blurry during this era. What seems like a grand adventure on the surface
Right.
often had a much darker reality for those who were caught in the crossfire.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that this wasn't just a story about a few famous individuals like Drake and Raleigh. There were countless others involved. Ordinary sailors, investors, merchants, all caught up in the system of privateering and empire building.
So English privateering helped establish them as a naval power, fueled their colonial ambitions, and even played a role in the defeat of the Spanish Armada.
Right.
But what about the long-term legacy? How did all of this shape England's future?
That's where things get really interesting. We can trace a direct line from the age of privateering to England's eventual rise as a global empire and its lasting impact on the modern world.
Okay, so you've really got me hooked now. We've talked about how privateering helped England become a naval powerhouse.
Right.
And even played a role in their colonial ambitions.
Yeah.
But how do we connect all of this back to the modern world? It seems like a pretty big leap.
It might seem that way, but the threads are definitely there.
Okay.
Let's start with England's naval dominance.
All right.
You know those privateers sailing all over the globe?
Battling storms,
enemy ships. They weren't just gathering treasure.
Right.
They were accumulating invaluable experience.
Yeah.
They were learning to navigate, to fight, to strategize in ways that would actually form the backbone of the Royal Navy for centuries to come.
So it wasn't just about the ships themselves.
No.
It was about the people sailing them.
The people, yeah.
They were essentially battle-hardened.
Battle-hardened, ready to face anything.
Ready to face any challenge.
And the wealth they brought back, well, that didn't hurt either. The Crown used those privateering profits to invest heavily in shipbuilding, expanding the Royal Navy into a force that could project English power across the globe.
I mean, that's a direct link.
It is.
Between the seemingly chaotic world of privateering
Right.
and the rise of a formal, dominant naval force.
A huge force.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about England's rise as a global empire? How does privateering fit into that puzzle?
Well, you know, those privateering voyages often went hand in hand with exploration and colonization.
Okay.
We talked about Raleigh's attempts to establish colonies in North America.
Yeah.
Those weren't isolated incidents.
Right.
Privateers were scouting out new territories, claiming land, and setting up the infrastructure for England to expand overseas.
So it was about more than just hitting and running.
Oh, yeah.
Grabbing treasure and getting out of there.
It was way more than that.
They were laying the groundwork for something much larger.
Much larger.
More permanent.
And, you know, as England established those colonies and gained control of major trade routes, their wealth and power grew exponentially.
Of course, yeah.
The profits from trade, combined with the resources they were extracting from their colonies.
Yeah.
Well, that's the fuel that propelled England's transformation into a global empire.
It's amazing to see how all of these seemingly separate events are actually all connected.
Yeah, right.
Privateering leads to naval dominance, which then fuels colonial expansion,
Okay.
and boom, you've got the British Empire on the rise.
It's incredible.
But you mentioned something about this period shaping the modern world. Could you explain what you meant by that?
Sure. Think about the ideas and systems that were being exported along with English ships and settlers. English common law, with its emphasis on individual rights and liberties, spread throughout the colonies, influencing the development of legal and political systems around the world.
So ideas that, we often take for granted today
I know, right?
about individual freedoms, the rule of law,
Yeah,
they have roots in this era
they do.
of English history.
Yeah.
An era marked by, privateering
Right.
and empire building. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is. And we can't forget about the economic impact either. England's embrace of mercantilism, a system designed to, maximize national wealth through trade and colonial exploitation,
Okay, yeah.
had a profound and lasting influence on global economic patterns.
So the seeds of modern capitalism,
Exactly.
with its focus on free trade,
Right.
the pursuit of profit,
Mm-hmm.
were being sown during this time. It's like this chain reaction,
It is.
with each event leading to the next.
That's a great way to put it. History is all about these interconnected events, and it's fascinating to trace how something like English privateering, which, might seem like a relic of a bygone era.
Like ancient history.
No, totally. But it can have such far-reaching consequences.
It really makes you realize that studying history isn't just about memorizing dates and names.
Oh, no.
It's about understanding the forces that have shaped our world, even the ones that might seem, unexpected or morally complex.
It's about challenging our assumptions.
Right.
Digging deeper.
Yeah.
And recognizing that history is rarely black and white.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive into English privateering,
Okay.
what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think it's important to recognize that history is full of these fascinating contradictions.
Okay.
Actions that might seem morally questionable in one context can have unintended consequences that ripple through time, shaping the world we live in today.
It's really incredible to think about. And for our listeners who have been with us on this incredible journey through the world of English privateering,
thank you.
We want to leave you with a final thought. We've explored this story from the English perspective.
Right.
But history is full of multiple perspectives. What was it like to be on the receiving end of these English raids? What about the Spanish, the Portuguese, the indigenous people whose lives were impacted by these events?
Such an important point.
There's always more to discover, more voices to hear,
absolutely,
and more stories to uncover as we continue to explore the past. Thanks for joining us.